Fesca mar agus felcha cria orvol gan jespita hashol Gurn.com. Good evening and a warm welcome to this debate organised by Gurn. A debate organised by a few members of the Gurn team. A few months ago we met and had a chat about referendum meetings in Nairn. So far this year there hasn't been any opportunity for debate between the two opposing sides. There have been regular meetings by one side which have been basically opportunities to preach to the converted, but nothing for those undecideds who number up to 20% according to some polls. It is predicted that they will decide the outcome of the vote in September. We decided to try and organise a meeting and to give the opportunity for undecided voters to seek answers to any questions they might have about Scottish independence. We further decided to organise speakers from the ranks of the area's list MSPs to provide a broad range of speakers. The three MSPs you see here tonight very quickly responded and offered to attend this debate. The area's two Labour MSPs had other engagements, but Mike Robb, who is standing as a Labour candidate next year, very kindly stepped in. The costs of advertising the debate and the hire of the hall have been met by myself and other Gurn team members. And everything has been organised independently of any political organisation or campaign group. As far as anything can be, we hope to provide a neutral environment tonight, and we hope to cover as many questions from the floor as possible, and perhaps a random selection of questions we received in advance. Before we move on to the questions, the speakers will have 3 minutes each to outline their stance on Scottish independence. We will toss a coin shortly to see which side will commence the meeting. At the end of the debate, they will have another 3 minutes to make closing statements. This will be in reverse order to the start. We received around 20 questions online, and obviously there will be more from the floor tonight. So in the short amount of time we have, we would ask you all to be as concise with your questions as you can, and for the speakers too with their responses. Before we begin, I'd just like to ask, how many undecideds do we have in the hall tonight? Please feel free if, Thank you. It's your night and you can ask the questions, and I hope you're less undecided at the end of the evening. Before we begin though, I'll introduce the speakers and start with John Finney. John was born and brought up at Clunies near Fort William before joining the police in Leith in 1976. During a 30-year police career, John served in Leith at the single office station at Kirkhill, was a dog handler and spent the last 14 years of his service as a full-time elected official of the Scottish Police Federation, retiring in 2006. In 2007, John was elected as a Scottish National Party councillor for Inverness Nestside Ward on Highland Council, and shortly thereafter was elected as leader of the 17-strong SNP council group. In 2011, John was elected to the Scottish Parliament as one of the regional list members for the Highlands and Islands, and retained his council seat, refusing the council's salary until the council elections of May 2012. In the Scottish Parliament, John was appointed to the Justice and Equal Opportunities Committees and made Parliamentary Liaison Officer to the Cabinet Secretary for Justice. John was elected convener of the Cross-Party Group on Human Rights and co-convener of the Cross-Party Group on Drugs and Alcohol. John resigned from the SNP, designating himself independent after the October 2012 SNP conference, following its decision to reverse its policy on NATO membership. We have Mary Scanlon here. Mary was born and brought up in Dundee in Angus and graduated from the University of Dundee in 1983 in economics and politics. She lectured in economics and business studies at Inverness College, UHI, prior to being elected to the Scottish Parliament in 1999 as a list MSP for the Highlands and the party's spokesman on health. Mary is now the Scottish Conservative spokesman for education and deputy convener of the Public Audit Committee, as well as the Conservative representative on the Parliament's Education Committee. She co-convenes the cross-party group on Scotch whisky and sits on several other cross-party groups, including mental health and dementia. Away from politics, Mary has a son, daughter and 4 granddaughters. Her interests include hill walking, pilots and knitting. Mary is a strong supporter of the Better Together campaign and believes in presenting the positive case of remaining in the Union of the United Kingdom, which has served Scotland well for over 300 years, rather than solely focusing on problems the separation from the rest of Scotland could bring. Jean Urquhart, MSP, was born and brought up in West Lothian. She left school and home when she was 15 and lived in Edinburgh, London and Glasgow for the next 8 years, as well as a short stay in Canada and North America. She developed a real love for the city of Glasgow and immersed herself in many community groups during the 5 years she lived there. In 1972, she went to Ullapool to help a friend out, actor Robert Urquhart, with his small summer cafe for a fortnight. She only really went back to Glasgow to pack up and head north, with her love and ambition for another part of Scotland inspiring her to make it work. Jean joined the SNP in 1989, elected in May 2011 to serve the people of the Highlands and Islands in the Scottish Parliament. Jean was a councillor for Westeros, Lochalsh and Strathfeather from 2003 to 2012 on Highland Council, where she chaired the Audit and Scrutiny Committee and was a member of the Education, Culture and Sport Committee. Jean was selected as the SNP's 2010 general election candidate for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross, and was the 2011 constituency candidate for Shetland before her election via the regional list system to the Scottish Parliament. A long-time member of CND, she resigned from the SNP in October 2012 following the party's decision to adopt a pro-NATO stance as part of an updated defence policy. Jean is now an independent MSP for the Highlands and Islands region in the Scottish Parliament. And the only person who isn't an MSP here, Mike Robb. Mike Robb is the Scottish Labour Party candidate for Inverness, Nairn, Bardnock and Strathspey at the 2015 general election. He is chair of Skye, Lochaber and Bardnock Constituency Labour Party, convener of the Highland Labour Campaign Forum and an active member of Better Together in the Highlands. Mike is also a member of Unite, the Union and the Scottish Cooperative Party. Away from politics, he runs his own business, an IT consultancy specialising in technology advice to high-growth businesses across the UK. After gaining a degree in physics from Edinburgh University in 1978, Mike has spent most of his career in software development and electronics, working for US and UK multinationals as well as for several small businesses. Mike lives in Murrevord with his wife Gwen, who is a nurse. They have 2 grown-up sons. Right, and now we'll toss a coin, and I'll ask, well, who wants to call? This is a bit difficult, isn't it? Okay, Mike, do you want to call?
First, tails.
Tails. It's heads. Who wants to go first? You guys are the winner of the Yes campaign. Do you want to go first, John? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry guys, you have to stay seated. So,
okay, well,
John will start.
Good evening everyone. Delighted you've come along to hear about opportunities. There's opportunities associated with this constitutional debate. I would say clearly the benefits lie with taking the opportunity to have a different set of priorities. There's no guarantees regardless of how you go, but what you do know is that the Better Together side are committed to further austerity. 60% of the cuts have still to come. We do know that there's to be a benefit cap, and shamefully the Labour Party voted for the benefit cap and an attack on welfare for under 25s. We know that Trident will continue, an obscenity, 1.34 billion already spent in early design, and over 100 billion over its lifetime. Contrast that with the limited powers that the Scottish Parliament has had in working collectively, because I think there's a social democratic consensus that we can build on, which has delivered free personal care. Now, it strikes the cross-party consensus there is around that. Free personal care, which has taken a lot of the anxiety out of older people. Free prescriptions. And I'm sorry that the Labour Party have abandoned their position on universalism for that. Prescriptions were a tax on sickness. People were presenting a script to a pharmacist with 5 items on it saying which 2 are the most important. That's no longer the case, and I'm delighted that's no longer the case. Free education. Education on the ability to learn, not the ability to pay. Now, things are far from perfect in Scotland. There are a number of great inequalities, but without the levers to deal with these, then we're not going to see change. If there had been the opportunity to change, then it would have taken place before now, but decades upon decades of unionist rule have delivered life expectancy levels equivalent to North Korea. I find that absolutely shameful. I think there are opportunities, there are no guarantees other than the ones I've laid out to you there. And I hope you'll take these opportunities, and I hope you will, yes. Thank you.
Thanks, John. That was very quick. Okay, Mike, would you like to go now, please?
Yeah, well, we've got about 3 months to go to, I think, what will be one of the most important decisions we'll ever take in our lifetime about the future of our country. So it's really good to have the opportunity to have this kind of debate tonight. And let me just start by saying that I agree with an awful lot of the things that John just said about the kind of country I aspire to see. And I know from hearing Jean speak as well before that we share a lot of those views as well. And I think my view about this, it's not about whether we want to achieve those things, it's what's the best way of achieving it. And that's where I part company with the Yes campaign. Because I think we still have a better chance of creating the kind of society I think we all want to see by being a joined up part of the UK, albeit a UK run by a different government than what it is now. So let me just try and make a few points about that case. Everybody talks about wanting to make a positive case for change. Of course, it's very difficult to make a positive case around the word no, because that's essentially what Better Together is asking you to do. But I believe being better together is better for our economy, it's better for business, it's better for jobs, it's better for pensions. There are things we can still do in the Scottish Parliament, and certainly my party and other parties are committed to doing in the Scottish Parliament, that will allow us to do more and bring about a situation where we have the best of both worlds, but with least risk. Now, one of the things I believe about is that being better together is better for business. The UK is predominantly made up of small businesses, about 70% of the economy. And in Scotland, 2/3 of those small businesses trade is with other parts of the UK. My business, probably about half my customer base is in Scotland, half my customer base is in England. And the last thing I want to see, and lots of business people I know want to see, is a situation where we put any kind of barrier, however informal, in getting in the way of that trade, because that does affect jobs. It does affect economic livelihood. And lots of these issues, we bring them up and we try and put our point of view across, and we get accused of being members of Project Fear, because we dare to sort of question some of the statements and assertions that the Yes campaign actually make. But I think it's important we bring those subjects up tonight and we properly debate them. And we can put a challenge out to people to say, if you're making that assertion, how much will it cost? And why will we be able to depend on oil revenues, which are volatile, and where lots of forecasters now are saying they're going to be a lot lower over the next few years than now. So I hope we're going to have a good discussion tonight. I hope we're going to ask a lot of searching questions, and I'll be delighted to give my view and my answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Jean, would you like to make your statement?
I don't speak very loudly, so can you hear me? Okay. No? Well, maybe I'll just stand up and shout. Is that better? Can you hear me now? First of all, thanks very much for the invitation to be here. Really delighted to come along. Thank you. Is that better? Thanks very much. I would like to start off by saying what the referendum is not. The referendum is not a general election. It's not a vote for Alex Salmond or a particular party. It's a vote for the country. It's a vote for the nation. It is. I think it's not about not liking England or hating England or not liking English people. It's not anything to do with party policies, particularly. For me, it's about hope, it's about democracy, it's about Scotland being able to vote for a government, to vote in a government and be served by that government rather than a government that it didn't vote for, which has been the case in Scotland I think since after the war, there's only been 2 occasions where the Scottish Labour vote actually meant that there was a Labour government, and both of these were quite short-lived. So the notion that somehow we would be leaving England or have no care for people across the border is completely outrageous. We are not, this is not about separatism. Scotland isn't going to be cut off at the border and sail off into the sunset. The land is still joined, and there will be, of course there will be, as there are across other countries in Europe, a perfectly good social union. Of course we would work together. When Ireland gained its independence in 1949, there was an act that meant that Ireland was not a foreign country. So the kind of fears about somehow all of us who have family living in England, or even businesses that trade with England, that need not be any barrier to the self-determination of the Scottish people. The Act of Union itself, of course, was interesting, and I'm always irritated by the call that Scotland, this is the first time in 300 years that the people who live in Scotland are having an opportunity to vote. 300 years ago they didn't have a chance then. This is the first time ever that the people who live in Scotland will have this opportunity to vote. And I think it is significant. In 1707, there were 180 people in the Scottish Parliament, all men, none of them elected, no democracy. And we lost that vote by 40 votes to join the Union. The English Navy was in the Firth of Clyde and the English Army was at the border. Scotland was in a very desperate financial state. 300 years later, and I used to think that was a long time, but you know, the older I get, I realise it's not a long time. We had an exhibition in the Scottish Parliament that was 420 million years of a great Scottish tapestry, 420 million years of Scottish history, and this is 300 years. It's the day before yesterday in our history. Now, I think that's my time up. Thank you.
Do you want to try that microphone? Yeah.
I think you're fine.
Yeah. Okay, Mary, please, if you'd like to.
Right, thank you very much. Can I also thank you all for coming tonight, and also to thank the Gurn from Nairn. Can I just say that I'm not really interested in pilots, although there may be an eligible one in the audience, I don't know. But I actually go to Pilates one night a week. Just in case anyone got the wrong impression. However, if there's any left over from Kinloss and Lossiemouth, who knows? I just thought I'd put that right from the start. Can I just say that it's good to share the platform, and can I also say that I have nothing but respect for John Finney and Jean Urquhart. I think they took a very, very brave decision to leave the SNP. They did it on principle, and I told them to their face that I'm saying nothing I haven't said to them. I do have the utmost respect for them. Tonight, I just feel that this debate could be a debate we'd be having 20 or 30 years ago. Everyone talks about Westminster domination or Scottish independence. We have devolution. And I've been in that Parliament, apart from a year out to stand for a by-election, I've been in since 1999. And John's right, free personal care, free prescriptions, you know, the amount of autonomy and devolution in the Scottish Parliament is incredible. So I just wanted to say we are in charge of our own NHS, our education system from nursery to university, roads, transport, police, our own legal system, housing, local and national government, and I could use my 3 minutes talking about devolution. So after the vote in 97 for devolution, when the Parliament started in 99, that was not the beginning and the end. We have 3 new taxes coming in next year. We have more borrowing powers coming next year. We've heard from the Liberals and the Labour Party about further devolution, and on Monday, in 2 days' time, in 2 days' time, my party will be announcing further devolution, but it's not really the point. What my party, the Scottish Conservatives, announce on Monday I don't think it's that important. What's important to me is that there is an open door with Westminster. So if something can be done better in Scotland, let it be done in Scotland. That's certainly a view since I got into the Scottish Parliament, whether it was William Hague, Ian Duncan Smith, David Cameron, they've constantly said to my group, whatever you think is right for Scotland, you decide. I don't need phone calls, so we're fully devolved in our party, and the open door has certainly always been there. I just wanted to say we also have our own culture, language, and I feel, in my vintage years, as Scottish as I will ever be. 307 years we've been together, fought together, in the face of global recession and bank failures. The banks were bailed out to the tune of 50 billion. That could not have happened at the moment, and that was very quick, but there you are. I could not argue with the Gurn from Nairn, and I will look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Well, Mary, if you'd like to pick one question at random from the questions we had online and hand it back to me, how will we protect ourselves? And I'd like Mike to start with that one, and we'll go around the houses again.
Well, I guess this is the question about defence. And I mean, I don't have a copy of the Scotland's Future White Paper book in my hand, because to be honest, it's quite a weight to carry around. But there is actually quite a lot of detail in there about Scotland's defence forces and what they should look like, and the sort of anti-minesweeper vote, etc. And it is quite well thought out. There's only two problems with it. It doesn't put any costs on it, and it kind of assumes that the UK government are just going to hand over their share of those ships and those vessels to the Scottish government as part of the negotiation. Maybe they will. But bear in mind that's going to be the same UK government that's going to be asked to take on £20 billion worth of cost to move Trident south of the border. So I think that's going to be a very hard negotiation. So the genuine answer is I don't know what's going to happen to defence forces after the referendum. And maybe John and Jean could enlighten us.
Okay, Jean, perhaps you could enlighten Mike.
I don't know if this is working or not. Sorry, I'm going to have to use that.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Well, I don't pretend to be an expert on defence, I have to say. But I do know that one of the things that we spend a lot of time in the Yes campaign is comparing ourselves with other nations who are similar size, similar terrain, similar size population, and similar economy. And none of them seem to have a big problem with defending their own nation. The first thing that I think has to be done is that there's a risk assessment as to who we're defending ourselves from. That's key. We have to know that. Who are we defending ourselves from, and how do we do that? I did hear a very good debate, including Lord George Robertson and Professor William Wallace from St Andrews University. And at the end of that, the cost that the Scottish National Party, and remember it's only one party, had put on defence of Scotland, he claimed to be at least £500 million too much. Now, at the moment, I think we are not defended. Recently, we had two, I'm not sure whether they were ships from Russia who sailed just into Scottish waters north of Shetland. And in actual fact, we asked France for help to defend ourselves. So I think there is an issue about defence of the United Kingdom as it stands, and I simply don't accept that we don't either have the skill, the imagination, the intelligence that we would require to defend ourselves.
Thank you. Okay, that's Mary, please.
Yes, it's a very good question, and the honest truth is that none of us have the answer. So I can only give you, I think the gentleman in the audience does, so...
Everybody that's speaking out there use that mic.
Okay. Is this one not working? Right, well, it was a very good question. I'm sorry the microphone isn't working. I can only talk about what's been said so far. At the time that the United Kingdom put humanitarian effort into Kosovo, because, well, I don't need to tell you what happened there with Serbia and Kosovo, Alex Salmond said it was an unpardonable folly. We all know what happened with the Iraq War, and we've heard the Chilcot inquiry this week. I'm actually very proud that it was a Conservative Prime Minister who asked the House of Commons to vote on whether we should take troops into Syria. And I'm actually very pleased that the vote was not in favour of taking troops into Syria. I think that's what democracy should be. And to be honest, after that vote, there was a change of heart with the Americans and with the rest of the world. I'm proud of that. When someone says, you know, about how are we going to protect ourselves, it is a very good question. And if you talk to anyone, even in the Parliament, I was on the corporate body, we have to be aware of many threats that are not visible day to day, but to pretend that there are no threats is undoubtedly naive. In Moray, they know all about protecting ourselves, and the constituency of Moray has benefited enormously between Lossiemouth and Kinloss. I recently visited the engineers in Kinloss, and they have settled in there very well.
I'll give you a few more seconds.
And on Trident, what I would say on Trident, better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Okay, John, you can finish on this one.
Okay, thanks. It's a very good question, because how you protect yourself and how you defend yourself are two entirely different things. And the answer is what you do is you assess the risks, and then you put in place mechanisms to ameliorate these risks. And the risks are very clear, and the risks that Scotland faces, independent or as part of the United Kingdom, are first and foremost continuity of energy and food, cyber attack, terrorism, and way down the list would be from another state. So we assess the risk and we put in place mechanisms to deal with that risk. Trident doesn't address any of these risks. Trident is a toy that gets the United Kingdom in a place in the Security Council. There's been atrocities in the United States, the 9/11, there was atrocities in Moscow with the attacks in the cinemas there was the terrible attacks in London and the underground and elsewhere. No one went, I'll tell you what, we'll not attack, they've got nuclear subs. That's not how the world works. It's a complete and utter waste of money. So what you do is, you assess the risks and you put in place. Now, I have to tell you that the strongest weapon the United Kingdom has is this, it's their mouth. And what we need to do is we need to be speaking to people. We need to try and resolve the issues around the globe that cause all these tensions. And there is confusion. Mary's quite right. I think it was good that there was a democratic vote. Of course, with the Iraq war, there's nothing to commend that. That went in a false premise. And I have to say, on deeply flawed information, you have to ask who benefited from that. Because war's good for business. And it was the United States companies like Halliburton. Because if you can get paid to blow the place up, and then you get public money to rebuild, then that's a very good deal, and that's the sort of thing we need to avoid by having discussions. Scotland was the centre of discussions connected with the breakup of the Soviet Union, the Edinburgh conversations, just along the road at Craigellachie there, where the discussions about Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh. That's what I would like to see Scotland do to defend itself, be a centre for peace discussions, and I think that would make us very strong in the world's eyes, not weak. We don't need tanks.
Thanks, John. Okay, have we got a question from any undecided voter?
I'm decided.
You're pretty much decided, Nigel. Maybe there might be time for you at the end, but it really is a night for the undecided. So, any undecided voter? Yeah, the young man there.
Basically, my question is just regarding the sort of ethics on the Better Together campaign and the Yes campaign. Basically, the Treasury put forward that it costs £2.7 billion to start up an independent Scottish government. This is a quote from whose report they extrapolated figures from. Said the Treasury's figures are bizarrely inaccurate. They've just plucked the figure out of the air and multiplied it by number. Now my question is, when Mr. John Swinney, our Finance Secretary for Scotland, didn't answer any questions on the start cost itself, how can we trust either campaign when the Treasury is blowing things out of proportion in this manner, and Mr. John Swinney won't even answer the question?
Okay, thanks for that. Jean, if you could lead off on that.
Okay, I get frustrated with these, with the Better Together and the Yes campaign too. I think largely because how many of us in this room would know? Would you know if that was a fair price or not a fair price? The point is that this is a decision for people in Scotland to decide if they want to be self-determined to govern them themselves. Now, there are already departments set up in Scotland. In fact, we have arguably one of the largest tax offices in Cumbernauld already, so the expertise is here. A lot of people won't want to leave. That will all of these things will be up for negotiation. But to suggest that this is a really good reason to vote no, or that we're better together, is a nonsense. That is simply the back office, if you like, of the governance of your country. And it will be paid for. I mean, one of the things that we do know, that about which there is no dispute, is that the economy of Scotland, even without the oil, is on par with the economy in England. So, you know, the notion that we somehow can't afford to collect our taxes or afford to create driving licences, for me, isn't the issue that's at stake. Although the Better Together and the Yes campaign will try and defend both these positions, and I understand that, but it's not a top priority.
Thank you. Okay, Mary, I'll keep going there.
Well, I don't know if the Treasury was wrong, but I certainly wouldn't assume because it came from the Treasury that it was plucked out of thin air. They do have a little bit of credibility to stand up for. John Swinney was asked 13 times what it would be, and
please, you can come back at the end if you...
John Swinney, this came up at First Minister's Questions this week. I didn't see him being asked, but apparently he was asked 13 times what the cost would be, and he couldn't come up with one answer, let alone anything plucked out. I mean, it's easy to dismiss the other side's figures. It's very easy to do that. It's a little bit more difficult to come up with an answer. So to be asked 13 times and come up with nothing was a bit difficult. But can I just say Ryan, and I only know his name's Ryan because I know his father Donald and he introduced me, just in case you think he's anywhere near my side. But can I just say Ryan, I am on the audit committee in the Parliament. When my opening remarks, I said there's 3 new taxes coming to Scotland next year. The Scottish rate of income tax will be collected by HMRC, so we don't have any additional costs next year. Assuming we're still under the devolution settlement. SEPA will collect the landfill tax. The third one will be collected by the Registers of Scotland. It's called the Property and Transactions Tax. Can I just say, Ryan, I haven't finished counting the millions in the set-up costs with 11 months to go. And they've already spent millions. The Auditor General suggested to the Audit Committee that they'd spent so much money on IT. He was very concerned about it. Robert Black, previous Auditor General, he suggested that we get them in front of us, Registers of Scotland, to ask what they'd spent. I can just say we weren't impressed. That was a year ago, and since then they have spent millions and millions more. So we're not there yet. We will know how much it will cost to collect one tax next year. But that's all I can say openly and honestly.
Okay, John, thank you.
It's a very good question, Ryan, and I understood it to be more about the ethics that's applied by both sides rather than just citing this particular example. So I think it was shameful that there was a misrepresentation, and when the professor from the London School of Economics said you're misrepresenting, that it continued, I think was unhelpful. I think Mary would agree. John Swinney's an honest man there, and I think there's no harm. Mike and I are at another event later in the week. We've got some very technical questions facing us. If I don't know, I'll say I don't know, but I'll find out. I think there are some uncertainties. What we do know is, and Mary's right to highlight the IT costs, and I'm involved with the police committee, and we're trying to get behind some of the difficulties with I6, a big programme at the moment. And IT in the public sector is notoriously fickle, there's no doubt about that. You know, particularly when some of the contracts are given to ministers' cousins. The reality is that some of the costs won't be known. What I want to say is, as part of the integrity I want to see in politics, I don't like the, you know, do this or we won't do that. I think there has to be an equitable share of the assets and the liabilities, and I would want to see an independent Scotland start on the right footing by doing the moral thing and accepting its share. Now, of course, there's going to be issues, whether that's defence, that Mike touched on earlier, about how the assets are going to be divided up. There's actually a fascinating, well, it's a Twitter feed, I don't know if there's a website, where they regularly say Scotland's share of this would be this. And it's done on a sort of very broad pro rata basis. So there are clear assets that are to be, and there are liabilities that will have to be met. There is also the infrastructure of government here, and with independence I would like to see jobs not find themselves in Edinburgh and Glasgow, but to be dispersed, because with IT and good IT there can be a lot of jobs come to the Highlands as well from governments. I'm afraid we've exhausted the process at the moment, and that was due to the good work of the previous Labour and Lib Dem administration. So there are opportunities connected with jobs.
Exhausted time as well. Do we have another undecided voter with a question, please? The lady there on the left.
I have a quick question, simple question, I think, about how you're going to collect your tax. At the moment, I live here in Scotland. I'm happy living here. But I'm paid from England, and my tax is collected by PAYE. How are you going to get it?
I'm sorry, I have to apologise for Mike. I didn't let him join in on the last question. So before we answer that question, yeah, you're happy, Mike? Yeah. Okay, Mary, if you could answer the PAYE. Begin.
Could I just say I was in Aviemore last night with Danny Alexander, and it was wonderful to sit there with the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, and any questions like Ryan's and your own, Danny answered them all, and I wish I'd written down all the answers. But can I just say, it was neither straightforward, and you know, neither was it totally illuminating. And I think actually it's a wonderful question, because these are the uncertainties that many people have. I can only give you one fact, and I'm retiring in 18 months' time. I'm not standing again. I don't need to be beholden to anyone. I can only tell you the truth. In this Public Audit Committee, we are overseeing the Scottish rate of income tax. Now, the Scottish rate of income tax, as I mentioned, all the big earners in Solomvo, Total, BP, all the big earners offshore in the North Sea that do not live in Scotland, their taxes will not come to Scotland. Only those who are domiciled in Scotland will pay tax in Scotland. Now, there's an awful lot to be negotiated, not only between pensions, but also between companies who are based in England, based in America, based here, based there. It's going to be very difficult. But what I can tell you about the tax that comes in next year, those who work in Scotland but are not domiciled in Scotland will not pay tax in Scotland. I can tell you that. Okay,
over to John.
I'm very keen that there's no tax avoidance. Your question,
that's the way it is.
Your question is very legitimate, and I think what's also legitimate is to say that, as Mary should know full well, is that the Conservative Pensions Minister only a fortnight ago reassured people there'd be no difficulty with them getting their pensions taken. For that reason, I'm delighted that that very large poster at Marketplace scaremongering about pensions by better together has been taken down. There are fine details that have been taking place. I mean, people have said to me, for instance, and I'm not avoiding your question, you know, where will I get my tax test from? Well, I wouldn't think there's any difficulty keep getting it from Swansea. This idea that there's going to be phenomenal change isn't the case. There are already arrangements. As you know, a Plumber Police Federation official, there's well-established positions for people getting their pensions paid abroad when they retire and things like that. These are not insurmountable in any way. If there's a will, there's to be a way. And if people are putting obstacles in the way, then perhaps you maybe want to say, why would that be the case? Because, you know, you can have a situation where there are many recipients in the Republic of Ireland who receive pensions for their war service and the like. There is no difficulty. If there's a will, there's a way. The tax that Mary alluded to, and of course one of the issues, the great issues of tax avoidance, and why I'm totally opposed to any suggestion of giving the Starbucks and Amazons any cut in corporation tax, is that of course there are ways round everything. And that's not news from Mary that non-domiciled folk don't pay tax. As we know from Oxfam and other reputable bodies like that, the level of tax avoidance which takes place in the Channel Islands, well, you may well shake your head, but this isn't a party political point I'm making. It's a point that to say that tax avoidance is a significant issue.
Answering my question.
I have answered your question. I've said that if there is a will.
Can you come back at the end, please? I'll give you a chance to come back at the end. Let's let all the speakers have their say, and then you can come back at the end. I'll give you the final say. Can you continue for a wee while, John?
Well, you know, language is terribly important, and the language of your question told me where you were coming from when you said you are. I want to be assure you that the position I'm in, and the position I understand the vast majority of the yes people to be in, is to work collaboratively. You know, Scotland's terribly important to me, but at the end of the day, it's a part of a small island off the northwest coast of continental Europe.
Okay, John,
the idea that we would work
Mike,
collaboratively is just inconceivable.
Okay, feel free to have a few seconds extra.
That's given me a chance actually to think a bit about both questions. And for me, the answer about both questions, the line I want to take is actually the same. I mean, that spat between the economists over whose figures should be believed and what Swinney knew and didn't know, and I thought it was completely unedifying. It was just an argument about numbers. But equally, what it really brought home to me was it's just one example of something really important to which we don't actually know the answer, where that actually lies. And it's the same thing about paying tax through PYE. We don't actually know how that's going to work. Now, John is absolutely right. With goodwill, good discussion, good thinking on all sides, over time, of course all these things can be sorted out. I've no doubt about that. But it's exactly the time and the cost and the energy that those things are going to take that worries me. We live in a highly competitive world. If we end up taking 2, 3, 4 years to sort these things out, with all the unexpected costs, all the things that haven't been thought about, we're going to find a lot of businesses in Scotland are going to vote with their feet. And that's what really worries me. We could find ourselves in a situation where we sort these things out, we move towards that land of milk and honey where all these collaborative ways of working come about. And we find ourselves, just as the Irish did, with a wrecked economy.
Correct.
Okay, Jean, if you could finish on.
Well, I would take the opposite view to that. Of course, the point is that we've only had a Scottish Parliament for 15 years, and Scotland has changed in that time massively in some of the policies that have come from all the parties who've been in power since 1999. And the change that's happened this year with the Scotland Bill is that we are setting up a tax office. That's what we need. It's not called Inland Revenue, it's called Revenue Scotland. But, well, you're shaking your head, but it's a practical matter of collecting tax on income. And it's not beyond the wit of people who live in this country. In fact, we do some of that work, but most of it's done in Newcastle and elsewhere. But the expertise is here to be able to do that. I mean, at the moment, I'm on the Finance Committee, and we're taking evidence all the time about how Scotland will. Well, either I've really misunderstood the question, and in which case, then I apologise for giving you the wrong answer. But if it's a practical solution, if you earn £10 a week and you're going to pay 2 to the Scottish Government, it's really not rocket science to show that we can do that. I mean, at the moment, one of the things that upsets me is the Scottish rate of income tax that's being devolved, because the cost of doing that and singling it out on your pay slip on a monthly basis is far more costly.
Thank you. I take it you're still unhappy?
Very much so.
Okay, then we'll leave it at that.
No, listen.
Okay, all right, I'll give you 10 seconds. Come on, sum it up.
I'm
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, we're going to have to move on.
But they're English, they're not Scottish.
Thank you. Jean, if you'd like to pick a question and hand it back to me. Whichever way we vote, i.e. to stay in the Union or to become independent, what are 3 things that would be better for us? And it's your turn to start, John.
Thank you. 3 things that would be better if we were independent. Well, politics is about priorities, and I would say that there are perhaps given the social democratic consensus that exists in Scotland, there are a different set of priorities. If you have control of your income and your expenditure, all of your income and your expenditure, then you can alter your priorities. We already see that, and Mary's right to say with the existing powers there's a different path being taken with regard to university education, and I make no apology for repeating these, with regard to prescriptions, with regard to concessionary travel as well, and there's an opportunity to do much more. There's an opportunity to take a different tack in relation to our international relations, and I have to say, fair play to David Cameron that when there were cuts, overseas aid wasn't one of the budgets that was cut. Albeit, I understand there's been, juggling about across the boundaries. I would like to see Scotland play an important role in the world, perhaps a different role from the United, well, not perhaps, definitely a different role, because Scotland's relationship with the world initially is going to be burdened with the past relationships. We're going to inherit some of these relationships. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Our connection, the United Kingdom's connection with the United States, is very problematic for the United Kingdom, I would say, and it will be particularly problematic in the first instance for us in independent Scotland. We'll need to take a different path. I've already said that I would like to see us not spend money on tanks, but spend money on being I would like to see a situation where the first contact any foreign citizen on their own soil has with a Scots person in a military uniform, that they've got a haversack in their back with humanitarian aid in it, rather than a rifle. I think that would be a very commendable approach to take. There are opportunities, as I say, to work collaboratively with the other countries in the United Kingdom and across Europe. I'm first and foremost an internationalist. I think the European Union is deeply flawed, but we must stay in it and work with it. So I think first and foremost, everything is connected with having the ability to determine your own economy and your own political priorities connected with that.
Thank you. We're going this way. Mike?
Well, the question was 3 things that we think would be better, so I'll give you my list of 3 that I think in a better together, joined up UK will be better after that vote. First of all, I think we'll be able to concentrate on creating jobs rather than having endless arguments about where headquarters are and trying to work out different tax regimes and different regulatory regimes. Secondly, I think having pensions funded by 60 million people instead of 6 million people is always going to be a better thing. And thirdly, and I can relate to this because our youngest son Ali, he's just 21, he's just graduated, so he's just starting the job search just now. And he's got an opportunity right now to look for a job anywhere he likes in the UK. There's no barriers to that, there's no dispute about what fees were paid at which university. And I think having a better together UK, where our young people have all of the opportunities right across that country, is really important. That's my 3.
Okay, Jean?
Well, so far we haven't really had an opportunity to come back on some of the other speakers, but to suggest that anyone from Scotland would somehow be inhibited from applying for a job anywhere across Europe or England or Ireland or anywhere else is absolute nonsense. Do you know, the Scots, more than any other nation, have moved around the world working and gaining recognition. Are we going to stop doing that? No, we're not. Do we have an opportunity to attract some of these folk back? Yes, we do. What we need to do, the good thing about independence is just that. We decide we can have, for the first time in a very long time, democracy in our country, that we actually will be governed by people that we elect. The economy is a given. We know that we're a wealthy nation. We compare with other countries who, whether you like it or not, are actually doing much better on the equality stakes, where men and women have equal pay, where they are a higher paid and higher taxed economy, but they have public services that they're proud of. I'm ashamed of this country just now, so one of the good things for me will be a real opportunity to get rid of food banks. food banks in Nairn, for God's sake. At some point, people realise that this vote is about hope, and it's about investing in yourself. It's about actually having the guts to see that you can govern your country and not settle for policies made by 600 people in a different one, but to have a proper grown-up relationship with that and stop blaming another government for all our ills, but actually take these things, take the right to do that into our own hands. And for employment, I think we absolutely have opportunities in this country that have been lost.
Thank you. Mary, it's you to finish on this question.
Thank you. Yes, three things. I'm probably a bit less Euro-sceptical than I was way back in '92. I want to stay in Europe. I did read the Maastricht Treaty, believe it or not, in 1992. And the three things I was opposed to in the Maastricht Treaty was the single currency. 22 years later, I'm still opposed to the single currency, and I'm not going to give you a lecture on bailing out Greece or anything. I don't think we should have a European common defence policy. I think as a sovereign nation, we should have our own defence policy. And the third piece of the Maastricht Treaty I didn't like was the common immigration policy for the whole of Europe, and I'm pleased that we did not sign up to Schengen, and so I'm happy about Europe in that sense. The second point is protection. I spoke so much at the beginning about pilots, I didn't get a chance to say that the United Kingdom has embassies in over 267 countries in the world, and offices in a further 154. So wherever we travel in the world, we have embassies. The third point I want to mention, and it is something that tends to come up at most of these hustings, is currency. Three things that are better. I'm not saying it's better, but I'm happy with the pound. I'm happy that we are paying back borrowing. I'm very happy about that. You can call it austerity. I call it paying back the debts. I'm happy that we have high employment and low unemployment. In fact, we are now the fastest growing nation in the whole of Europe. And I'm also happy that we sell more to England. More is sold from Scotland to England than we sell to the rest of the world put together. And 80% of our tourists come from England. So three things that are better. I think these are three things I just want to continue.
Thank you. Okay, another question from the audience, please. An undecided voter. Gentleman there, Jules, on the right. Good.
In her embraced my question in her opening address, and it was about the legitimacy of the Scottish referendum on, well, not the referendum, but the Act of Union. Now, Jean gave a very good account of what happened in 1707, but she didn't fully explain the position. The Scottish nobility were in charge of the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh. The English sent spies to Edinburgh.
How does this get round to helping you make your mind up, sir? If you could...
Well, this is something I want to establish. If we were taken into the Union in a dodgy dossier, to use a modern term, then the whole thing must be, surely, if that is the state of the historical facts, are that we were taken into the Union in a dodgy dossier. Now, why did the Scottish Parliament vote for, why did the nobles vote for the Union?
Is that the question?
Yes, why did they vote for the Union? Because they had
okay, John, if you can answer that.
Well, the problem in those days is pretty much mirrored.
I'm sorry, we have to start with Mike. No problem. Smashing that thing.
So, I think if I've got the question, it's why did all those layers of the day back in 1707 vote for the Union? I'm tempted to answer, well, I wasn't there, so I'm not so sure, but I think we're looking at a completely different time and a completely different set of circumstances. And I think that the choice we're faced with in September of this year is about the kind of Scotland and the kind of world we want to live in now. And you know, we can inform some of that thinking about what happened 300 years ago, but there's an extent to where we need to start from where we are. And that's a really important decision about the best way to run our country into the future.
Okay, keep going around and all of that.
I mean, the reason I mentioned that in my opening address was to show that it's quite a recent thing. You know, the Acts of Union were signed under duress, certainly, with no democracy, certainly, and with people rioting in the streets, certainly. But I don't think we can question the legitimacy of that, because custom and practice are accepted in law. So even if you were to question the Act of Union, the fact is, for 300 years we have gone along with the outcome of the signing of the Union. So I think we recognise that we're part of the Union. And I've only got one other thing to say about that, and that is that I think we are in many ways romantic about things that have come about as the positives about the Union, as though somehow we're ridiculing that by wanting to vote yes or to have independence. The point is that we may well have gone to Iraq. I don't know that we wouldn't, but we would have made the decision in Scotland. I don't know, of course we would work. When the riots were happening in London, I understand we sent about 1,100 police down to London from Scotland. Would we stop doing that? Of course we wouldn't. What we're talking about here is the governance of our country and everybody who lives in it. It doesn't mean that we'd stop talking to anybody south of the border. It doesn't mean that there can't be a social union and that we will agree when we come to negotiate on a lot of things that will make sense for both countries. But when it comes to the important things, we will get the government that we vote for.
Thank you. Go down to Nairn.
Thank you. I just want, Jean said we've gone along with it for 307 years. Oh, we have gone along with it, but it's not exactly stayed the same. You know, the Act of Union was changed by an Act of Parliament, and that Act of Parliament was the Scotland Act 1998 that set up the Scottish Parliament in 1999. So I'm sorry if I'm boring you and being repetitive, but I go back to the point I made. We do not have the same settlement that we did in 1707. We have a devolved Parliament in Edinburgh. We have increasingly devolved powers coming to Edinburgh. Can I just say, I think the gentleman in the audience, I'm old enough and wise enough never to pick an argument with someone that knows more about history than I do, and I could suss from where you were coming from that you know a lot more about the Act of Union. The only thing I can say is that the Tories didn't vote for it. And here I am, there we were 300 odd years later, voting against the Act of Union and wanting to stay in a United Kingdom. So it's quite odd that we are the oldest party in Scotland. The Conservative Party is the oldest, but the Conservatives at that time, and I have no doubt about what Jean said, that there would be all men, but the Conservatives did not vote for the Act of Union in 1707. But my feeling is we are a family of nations, we've hung together, we've been through wars together, we've fought Nazism and terrorism together, we're a vibrant, dynamic nation, and we are respected worldwide. I've got a couple of minutes left here. I think the other thing I would say is the United Kingdom is we are one of the G7 and the G8. Now don't tell me that that's not important. And we are one of 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. And in the European Union, we are, along with the top 3, France and Germany.
Okay, John, if you could finish on that question, please.
Thank you. Well, I certainly wouldn't be dismissive of history, but like Mike, I think the important thing is to look forward. And in the past, you had these elites, and good grief, if the Tories did that, well done the Tories 350 years ago, big change now. But you had a situation there where it was elites, and we still have elites. It's elites that run the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's a country that's only been in position since 1922. And these, the elites are the bankers, are the public school boys, and I stress the word boys. They're the military, they're the corporate interests. And I have to say, These people they're not bothered about boundaries, perfectly honest. They'll go to Eastern Europe, they'll go to the Far East for profit. They're not bothered by these things. I think we need to have a different approach. We need to have a completely different approach. Mary said G7, G8, and that was fascinating. That was fascinating, because they get a wee bit confused now, the United Kingdom government, when they're talking, because they used to love saying the G8. Then, of course, Vladimir, who after all actually is a KGB thug and always was a KGB thug, when the West conceded him carpet bombing Grozny as part of the deal with the Iraq War, the dodgy deals that do go on. But of course he was a good guy. But he's not, we'll be a bit confused at the moment, because he's a bad guy for what he did, but like all that dirty Russian money, and the money from the oil from the Arctic now, pour into the City of London, unchallenged. So I think we need a moral framework around which we work in the future. The present model, I have to tell you, Mary, and I know you got applause for it, the United Kingdom isn't lauded around the planet. The United Kingdom is condemned around the planet, which is precisely why all of these embassies are like Fort Knox, because they are the subject of terrorist attack because of the association and all the negative associations. We need to change that approach. Scotland needs to be outward looking like the Scandinavian countries, like our close neighbours, Ireland, and be seen as a beacon of hope in the world, not a repressive post-colonial regime.
Thank you. Okay, Mike, if you could pick a question and hand it back to me. Please give me one good reason why I should vote yes or no. Okay, it's all reasons. Perhaps you could all think of another one. Start with Jean.
I'm not going to give you any reason, because I think that when everybody goes into that ballot box, the power is in your hand. And we know that on the 18th of September, only on the 18th of September, the people who live in this country, people who live in Scotland, are sovereign. And they can choose to maintain that with a yes vote, or they can choose not to do it with a no vote. And I think when people go in, it's down to you. It won't matter. It really will not matter about who collects the tax, how we collect the tax, and the practical. We know that we have the intelligence and the ability to do that. So please don't have that stop you. Think about yourself, your future, and I'll be voting for my grandchildren. And I hope that you will too.
Thank you for going this way. We're going around in a circuit.
Thank you. Well, I think again, I would never, and I never have, imposed my views on anyone else, but I do respect the fact that you're coming tonight, and I also respect the fact that there are a lot of people in this audience who are genuinely undecided, and I know friends of mine, and I've got friends in the audience tonight, who keep saying, Mary, can we get some more leaflets, can we get more information? So people are engaging, they are weighing this up. This is a vote that can't be overturned at the next general election. So what I would say is do what's right for you. All I can say is, I am as Scottish as I'll ever be. I'm as independent as I'll ever be. Nothing that would happen in a yes vote will make me any more Scottish than I am. I think what infuriates me, and I don't often mention the other campaign, but I have been in the Parliament since '99, and we've always had fairly good relations between parties, regardless of what you stand for. That's changed. That has changed. And it's not changed for the better. And what I hate, what really upsets me to my core, is when people from the SNP, and Jean and John may not agree with this, but this has been said many times, when people stand up and say, well, how can you be Scottish and you're not voting for independence? How dare you? How dare you? So all I'm saying is, this is not questioning whether you're Scottish or not. They don't come any more Scottish than I am. Do what's right in your heart and keep seeking the answers. They're often difficult to find. And while I've got 19 seconds left, we sought legal advice on entering the European Union. Not because I wanted it or anyone else wanted it. The Information Commissioner for Scotland thought the people of Scotland need to know, will we get straight into the European Union if there's a yes vote? The fact is, the Information Commissioner took Alex Salmond to the High Court in Scotland to see the legal advice that guaranteed to get Scotland into Europe. And guess what? It didn't exist.
Thank
That's
you.
a fact.
Okay, John.
Well, I hope we'll come on to a Europe question at some point. Can I say one of the reasons I'm very keen to see independence? I don't lay all the blame for everything at Westminster. And I actually don't recall if I've mentioned the word Scot at all tonight. I am, first and foremost, an internationalist. I want to be outward looking, and that's the future I see. I stay right in the centre of Inverness, and half a mile either side of my house, life expectancy is 14 years difference. That's between Merkinch and Lochaber. 14 years difference. That's a damning indictment. That's a damning indictment in the Scottish Parliament, the UK Parliament. Now, the level of inequality that exists in the United Kingdom is ridiculous. The level of health inequality, fuel, wealth as well. And with the opportunity to build on, and I keep coming back to the free personal care, free prescriptions, that approach, Mary quite rightly says the NHS is a devolved matter. And you may say, well then why would privatisation in England and Wales have any effect in Scotland? Well, very simple like this. There are places in England already when you ask to go and can I see the minutes of the local health authority, I'm afraid that's commercial in confidence. It's West Sussex Virgin Healthcare or something like that. Now, the less public money that's going into the health service in England will have a potential effect on the Barnett formula. Now, our own MP, Dan Alexander, this week had 3 different versions of what the Barnett formula was, and I don't know if he was speaking for Mary and Mike on that occasion, but he was completely all over the place with that, and of course had to be reminded where we are. So the opportunity to address the real things, that needs the money. It needs you to have the ability to have the priorities. And the priority is not spending 100 billion, putting in place a weapons system we would never use when we have the obscenity of the health inequalities. Old folk at night trying to make up their mind because they're staying in damp houses, whether they're going to cook themselves a meal or put on the fire. The fuel costs, that's another thing we have to address.
Thank you, John. Do we have another question from the... We have one. Okay.
You've got to work hard at this debate if you're not elected.
Please don't get suspicious, Mike.
I wanted to try and follow the theme that Jean introduced and speak a little bit about hope. In many ways, I would love to be able to walk into that ballot box on the 18th of September and vote with my heart. I'm a very optimistic person, and I'm massively attracted to that idea of a really big change that took us into a very different place and achieved a lot of the things that John's just finished speaking about. But that's not the world we live in. The reason we've got things like food banks, zero-hour contracts, the bedroom tax, kids that can't find jobs, is because if you don't get the economy right, if you don't create a situation where you can stand up to a lot of those outside interests that want to do your country down all the time, that's a lot of the things that happen. And one of the reasons I want to stick within the UK is not because I agree with all the things the UK government's doing, far from it. But I want to make those changes and see those changes happen, not just in Scotland, but right across the UK. That's the kind of hope I believe in.
Thanks. Could we have another question from an undecided voter? The young man there, Jules.
Well, I'm delighted to be able to ask this question with 3 MSPs here on the panel. Would the Scottish Parliament decrease or increase its membership following a yes vote in September?
Decrease or increases?
Membership. Mary.
Can I just say the Scotland Act actually set out that the Scottish Parliament would have 108 members, and we have 129. I was a member of the corporate body, and that's the body that runs the Parliament. When we were looking at the additional powers, the additional numbers we would need for defence, foreign affairs, welfare, DWP, everything else that's currently done across the United Kingdom, we were actually, I can't say we're looking for new members. All I can say is, as a member of 2 committees in the Parliament, the committees are absolutely chock-a-block. The parliamentary debates and the legislative timetable has been fairly chock-a-block for 15 years to take on the full responsibility of Westminster and not increase the members and the number of the committees and the responsibilities, I think would be naive in the extreme. So I don't have the exact yes or no, but I think it's very, very likely we would need more MSPs. But then there would be 59 unemployed MPs with a wee bit of experience, so, you know, you never know.
I think the answer is that Mary, I would agree with everything Mary said there. There are real challenges, and the challenges came about from having a majority government. The system wasn't designed to have a majority government, and the parliamentary system is such that it's a single chamber there's no revising chamber, so the role of committees is terribly important. And because every single thing in the Parliament, as Jean and I know dearly every single week, every single thing in the Parliament is proportional. So if you have a majority, then you have a proportional majority on the committees, or if you're two independents, unless a debate extends into effectively a second day, you have no entitlement to speak. So I'm very, very well conscious of the restraints that are placed by the existing system. I can't see that there wouldn't have to be an increase. I have to be perfectly frank about that. That maybe is not the answer you were anticipating from someone on the yes side. There are a lot of responsibilities. I suppose you could maintain the same number and have smaller committees, but it's absolutely vital, the scrutiny. You know, my colleagues are on important committees, audit and finance, and I know the committee papers I get for justice. It is hugely demanding keeping on top of this, and an important role. Even when I was a backbencher for the government party, I thought it's a very important role to scrutinise. It's very important if the Parliament enacts law, it has to be good law, and I think there will be additional demands that would have to be met, perhaps by additional members. As Mary says, there are consequential savings from not sending people to Westminster, and there's a very laudable saving to make in my view.
Hopefully I'm answering a hypothetical question, but if there was a yes vote in September, I actually wouldn't like to see the numbers of MSPs at Holyrood increase significantly. You know, we maybe need a few more. I would like to actually let us use that as an opportunity to really change the way we manage and devolve power and decision making right across the country. So rather than concentrating yet more power back again and almost creating another mini Westminster down at Edinburgh, I think we should look at how do we devolve power back to local authorities, how do we devolve power back to local communities. So maybe it's about having more elected members with more real power on council seats and back in local communities like this. And I remember the last election, lots of people in Nairn talking to me about how you felt everything had been taken to Inverness, and everybody in Inverness thinks everything's been taken to Edinburgh. A yes vote would be an opportunity to reverse that and maybe put some more power and authority back into local communities rather than the centre.
Thank you. I mean, to answer your direct question, I suspect that there probably would be a larger number of members required for the Scottish Parliament. I think that Mary's absolutely right. One of the things, though, that I would like to come back to Mary is the notion that the Parliament is constantly saying we're more Scottish than you are. I just think it's outrageous. For a start, this referendum is not about being Scottish. It's about people who live in Scotland having adequate representation. And I agree with Mike, absolutely. And I think there's a growing feeling locally. And as a regional member for the Highlands and Islands, one of the things that I see happening is people taking more and more control of their own affairs. I mean, we could list endlessly local development trusts and community organisations that are putting up wind turbines, or they're in where I live, they're starting this is a bit off topic, but it's just an example of the push that's coming for people to have much more local control of things. So I agree with Jim, but I do think the Parliament will have more people. But again, as we say, we'll save 52 salaries and expenses of sending people to Westminster, and of course we would not have the House of Lords, an unelected chamber now of I think over 900 people. having any influence over the democratically elected government, parliament.
Thank you. Jules, I see Brian Stewart has been trying to ask a question for some time. Do you want to go ask a question, Brian? Is it still undecided, or is your mind made up now? You're going to be on a timer as well, okay? Yeah, starting now.
Thanks, Des. Thank you. My question is about Devo maps. And it's a question that actually doesn't come from me. It's something I picked up from a news bulletin a few days ago. I thought it was interesting. I picked up a remark that Mike Robb made in his introductory statement, where he said, "What's the best way of achieving what we want?" The whole debate about the referendum is happening on two levels. It's happening at the political level. It's about autonomy, it's about sovereignty, it's about decision making. And it's also happening at a practical level. It's about benefits, it's about economy, it's about the practicalities of living. And it struck me that it's going to be really hard to reconcile these two. Political autonomy means more sovereignty at Holyrood and perhaps more control in Edinburgh and at local community level. But the other iron law of economics is that you do get economies of scale. You do get greater efficiency with removal of barriers and the forming of consortiums, whether it's a private sector company or whether it's a national organisation. And so the question that was actually articulated by, I think, a 15-year-old schoolboy was, all the parties have committed themselves publicly to a greater measure of devolution. So this is a question primarily for the yes spokespeople. Is not the best way of achieving what we want to seek greater devolution while at the same time achieving the economies of scale and the benefits of a larger market and a larger infrastructure that remains within the Union? Wouldn't Devo Max actually deliver both solutions?
Thank you. John, mainly for the yes, and you're a yes man.
I can see the attraction of that, and I keep saying I want to work collaboratively, but of course Devo Max wouldn't deal with defence. It wouldn't stop the abhorrence of 100 billion plus being spent on Trident. It would have no impact on foreign affairs and the role that the United Kingdom plays the very negative role it plays in association with the United States, for instance, in relation to the so-called war on terror, another $5 billion committed by President Obama 2 or 3 days ago, which sees Terror Tuesday, as New York Times called it, when the President meets to decide who's going to get murdered. That's taking place from Lincolnshire as well now, so it wouldn't deal with that. It wouldn't deal with the promise to address Guantanamo. It wouldn't deal with the issue of rendition flights, which took place 3 or 4 miles along the road. I think the reality is that I want to work collaboratively internationally, but all the important things I want to do require people of Scotland, and James Wright, it's people living in Scotland, and Scotland's a multicultural country and all the richer for it, for the people of Scotland to make choices based on having all the wherewithal to deliver these choices, rather than always being a contributor. For instance, I asked the Scottish Government about the United Kingdom's policy on the Arctic. I said, did the United Kingdom government consult the Scottish Government about its policy on the Arctic? Because we hear a lot about the Arctic. And I got a very, very bizarre reply, one of many bizarre replies I got from the Scottish Government. And that reply was, we have no record of having been consulted. Now, the Arctic, of course, we talked about a lot in the NATO debate. It talked about in relation to the exploitation that is going to take place there. It's going to be the scene of the next battle between multinational oil companies. I want Scotland to be no part of that. I would like Scotland to lead the beacon on the UN and ensuring that the Arctic was a UN protectorate. That's not going to happen with Devo Max. So we need the full powers to make all the important decisions.
Thank you for going this way. I'm going to let Mike have a go this time round.
I guess what you were getting at with your question was going into the detail of some of the things I wanted to say later on, so I won't try and repeat them all. I've been a big supporter of the sort of Devolution concept from fairly early on, because I do think it gives us a good opportunity to get a lot more power over the things that really matter in Scotland, while still maintaining some of the things that are important to us as a country of 60 million people, with the influence that comes with that. I think the decision for me comes about how you actually achieve that. We ended up not having a third question in the ballot paper, which would have gone to the heart of that question. Initially I was enthusiastic about that, but the more I started to think about it, the more I thought, actually, it's just going to muddy the water. We're not necessarily going to end up with a clear decision about this. But what I would like to see is a no vote on September the 18th, and then a really powerful discussion about genuine devolution of more powers to the Scottish Parliament. And my own party's just produced this, Together We Can. It's not as big and thick as the SNP's white paper, but that's not exactly short of hope and aspiration. There's a lot of really good material in there about the kind of Scotland the Labour Party would like to create in that post-referendum world. And that's my concept of Devolution.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think when the natives get restless in Scotland, we get a little bit of power. There was a disappointment in 1979 with a referendum then. There were promises made that weren't maintained. Some of us remember that. So the promises is an issue that we all have to really consider, I think. If you're thinking that great things will come, I just ask you to remember that. And, they say you can't believe politicians. Well, we didn't. We believed them then, maybe, but nothing came of it. The natives were restless again in the early 90s and through the 90s. And I don't believe for a minute that we had devolution for Scotland because the government in Westminster entirely thought it was a great idea. I think they knew that they had to do something. The Labour Party had really, I think a lot of us expected them to win in 2092, and they didn't. So they needed to pull a rabbit out of the hat. The Devo Max question, I don't think will amount to a row of beans, I have to say. I think that we have an opportunity. I'm glad it's not on the ballot paper. I know that Alexander was quite keen to have it there, but it wasn't to be in the agreement that David Cameron and the negotiation about the franchise wouldn't allow a third question. I think that it's right that it would have muddied the waters, it wouldn't be clear. So I think it's forcing everybody to think very clearly and as much as they possibly can about what will come with independence and how that will be. And that is the discussion, that's the debate, not about Devo Max.
Thank you. Mary, to finish on this question. The last speaker, Mary.
Well, far be it from me to sit here and wax lyrical about the Labour Party, but they were elected in May 1997, they had a referendum in September 1997, and it was Donald Dewar who set up the Scottish Parliament in May 1999. I congratulate the 15-year-old boy that came up with that question. Well done, and I hope he was one of the 74% of Nairn Academy pupils that voted no, because that was a very well-informed question. I think I didn't vote for the Scottish Parliament. But we have been thoroughly, as Conservatives, constructive and positive about everything we've done. It was a democratic vote and we have done our best to make that Parliament work well, and there's no one in any party could say otherwise. Devo Max is already happening, and I think people forget that in this debate. I mentioned the 3 new taxes for next year. I don't know what's coming out on Monday from my party, but we've certainly got a guy called Murdo Fraser who would like to see the Scottish Parliament having fiscal autonomy, which means that we raise all the taxes in Scotland for all the money that's spent in Scotland, and that would give the Parliament real accountability rather than constantly saying, oh, we're not getting enough from Westminster, and that would make us much more accountable. That may be happening, I don't know. But just in the time I've got left, you mentioned about the economies of scale. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But you also mentioned, I think, political autonomy. Whether after the referendum we stay with the pound or we move, or Scotland moves to the euro, the fiscal, monetary and taxation policy will not be decided in Edinburgh or Scotland. As part of a single currency, we will have to cede sovereignty and do what we're told, really, round the table from the Bank of England or the European Central Bank.
Thank you. We'll take one more question before the closing statements, but I'm going to have to ask the speakers to reduce the time of the responses to fit it in. One more question from anybody? Gentleman there. Yeah.
A bit confused as to what Mary Scanlon said earlier on. Nobody seemed to challenge her about. You basically said that independent Scotland wouldn't be able to have bailed out the banks. Well, who bailed out Barclays?
Is that your question?
Well, because an independent Scotland would not be liable to bail out the Royal Bank of Scotland, an independent country. Likewise, because Barclays was an English bank, should therefore, under your argument, should have been bailed out by the Bank of England. It wasn't. It was bailed out by the US Federal Reserve.
Do you have a question for the
Well, nobody challenged it. So why are we hearing this myth has been debunked? So why did nobody challenge that? Unless I'm going to become a no voter.
We don't have 50 billion to bail them out.
It actually begins with, Mike, if you could all respond in about a minute to that question or statement, please.
First of all, I'm not sure. Barclays, I think, was the one bank that didn't get bailed out. But that's another argument. I think this goes to the heart of the argument about the pound and the joined up currency. An independent Scotland, in whatever currency arrangement it came to, would have to be in a situation where it could assure the financial markets, capitalist though they are, that they had the wherewithal to act as a bank of last resort should any of those banks get into issues. And that's the real problem. Because if those financial institutions were not satisfied with that, they put the interest rate up to lend you money. And that affects your mortgages, affects your personal loans, it affects the economy. That's the issue.
Okay, we're going that way.
Well, you know, the issue is the economy of the country, and what we know already is that Scotland would have the same rating as the rest of the UK. That's what's important. And Standards and Poor's and other professional organisations have made that comment. So the point is not, you know, of course there will be some jitter. It's a bit like the threat of all these incorporated companies that might somehow disappear south. Now there was a great issue made about Standard Life. For example, I happened to get a copy of Standard Life's annual report. Every incorporated company is obliged to have to cite the risks that might apply. They cited the risk of the referendum and an independent Scotland, but they took action by forming a company that was licensed in England. That's all they had to do. There's 6,000 people work for Standard Life in Edinburgh. I'm talking to them. They say that their expertise is required. They're not planning to leave Scotland, and work will continue. So I just ask everybody to think logically about some of the issues. And it's funny that the Royal Bank of Scotland in a United Kingdom suddenly became a Scottish bank.
Okay, Jean. Thank you. Mary, then John, and then we'll move on to closing statements.
Thank you. No, I'm pleased that question came up. I actually had an email from someone this week saying, will there be a financial conduct authority in Scotland? And I think that's just as important as the point you made. An independent Scotland, from Alec himself, if it was an independent Scotland, the lender of last resort, if we retained the pound, would be the Bank of England. That no one questions that. The lender of last resort If we're still using the pound, if we have a yes vote, the lender of last resort is the Bank of England. If we use the euro, the lender of last resort is the European Central Bank, who bailed out Greece, Spain, Portugal and Ireland. The one thing that I would say about the Royal Bank, I think, and the Bank of Scotland, they still have a long way to go, but those shares, I mean, it was a Labour government, Alistair Darling, that bailed them out. Iceland didn't bail out its banks. There's other arguments here, but the shares will be sold on, and eventually the taxpayers' money should come back, but it might take a bit of time, although I think the TSB went for sale this week.
John?
As I understood the point, it was about the challenge as to whether Scotland could have met its obligations. Well, as my unionist colleagues well know, there's actually a tried and accepted formula for this that relates to the percentage of customers, and of course the Bank of Scotland in any case was headquartered in Halifax in England. So the other thing is that it's, as Jean said, there is no such thing as a Scottish bank. We have this very quaint notion. Capitalism means that there's probably no such thing as a French bank, no such thing as a United States bank. That's the very rage about it. The TSB, the Early Savings Banks, is a very commendable establishment, I do agree, but I would commend credit unions. So the bailout issue is indeed a complete and utter wobbly. You know, Jean's right, the credit rating, we were told that Scotland would be a basket case economy, but the very stark fact is that whatever they're called in Poors again, sorry, it's a bit late, Standard & Poor's thanks me, this time on a Saturday night, they've made it very clear that Scotland's a very viable economy, and I don't think even David Cameron questioned that.
Okay, we're going to move on to the closing statements. 3 minutes again. It's going to be in reverse order, and Mary will be the first to go.
Well, I haven't exactly prepared anything. So can I just thank you all for coming along tonight? Believe it or not, it probably doesn't look like it, but this is what politicians should be doing. And I've stood in many elections. I've been around Scottish politics for over 35 years. And many public meetings that we come to, I'm not talking about Better Together or the referendum, they're very poorly attended. The one thing about this debate, it's got people out of their houses on sunny Saturday nights coming along here and listening to what we have to say. And I have to say that it's not all about us talking to you. I actually find when I leave these meetings during the week, I think, that was quite a good point you made, and you know, there's a lot of food for thought comes from this. If I didn't come along and learn something, I really wouldn't be doing my job right. I don't know if anything I've said has persuaded you to vote no, yes or no, but I have enough respect for the voters that it's not for me to tell you how to vote, it is for you to make up your own mind. I hope you've found tonight helpful in making that case. All I say is look around you, look at what you have around you, and I think we live in a fabulous country. I'm optimistic about Scotland. I love Scotland. I love being Scottish. I just do not see the benefits of going into a United Kingdom. I wish I'd prepared this now. Got it in 30 seconds.
You can think of something you can keep going.
I can always stop.
Yeah.
But no, I just hope you found it helpful. I'd like to thank you for coming tonight. And I think it's also important, I do actually, I'm sure the Gurn from Nairn will say it, but I think it's important that we conduct ourselves in a respectful way, because I think the worst thing about this debate is people all talking over each other. At least one person has been able to talk tonight. I found some of the television and radio debates where people all talk over each other, a total switch off. So thank you tonight, and I hope you will vote no in September.
Thank you, Mary. Jean next.
I think there's a lot to think about. Now, that might sound like a very kind of silly thing to say, but what I mean is that it's not about party politics. And in a way, this lineup is defining something that I think is not realistic. Because at a recent Yes meeting, we had a Liberal Democrat for Yes, a Tory for Yes, a Labour Party member for Yes, Business for Yes, and Women for Independence groups reflected. Not an SNP, not even a kind of left the party SNP, and I would say that Nairn could cope with a panel that were not politicians. I think it's good to hear from ordinary folk who identify with a political party or are a member of a political party but are voting yes. And I hope, if I have one message tonight, it's to leave party politics behind. It doesn't matter about party politics. For me, politics at the moment is at an all-time low in the United Kingdom, and Scotland is suffering that. We are paying the price. So I think there's hope. I really think there's hope that we can do things differently and we can do them better with everybody who lives in this country, regardless of their nationality, but for the best for the people who work here. And I think we are disadvantaged by having 52 members of a parliament of 656 or whatever it is, making decisions on our behalf. We have an opportunity to take sovereignty for the people of Scotland into our own hands, and I hope we do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mike?
I think what we're talking about tonight, it is about hope and it is about aspiration. But it's also about how we actually achieve it. And I think we can all talk very finely about the kind of society we'd like to see, the kind of world we'd like to see. But we also need to be pragmatic about our ability to actually achieve that and attain it. I get a lot of the democratic argument and the democratic deficit. All respect to Mary, I don't want to see another Tory and coalition government ruling this country. Nor do I want to turn my back on all those working people all across the rest of the United Kingdom that also want to see that change as well. And that's the kind of change and hope I aspire to be part of. I get the case for devolving power. I get the case for giving more power back to local authorities. And we could do a lot of that now if we actually chose to do that, using some of the powers that already exist at Hollywood. And I get the no nuclear weapons or our soil argument. I didn't put it on my resume. I've been a member of CND for 30 years. And no one believes more than I do we need to get nuclear weapons out of our country. But I don't want to see them just out of Scotland. I want them to see them out of the whole of the UK. I don't want them just moved down the road to Barrow, which is what the risk we actually might find happens. What I don't get is policies that talk about hope and aspiration, which actually play fast and loose with the lives and the livelihoods of working people in this country. When I hear promises about pensions and social care that just don't start to add up if you need to think about what happens with the oil revenues. Promises on a tax system, which just won't work if you're part of a currency union. And we talk about European Union membership, and we haven't talked about that tonight. I've got no doubt whatsoever that Scotland would become a full part of the European Union. I don't think there's any issue with that whatsoever. The challenge for me is how long that process might take and the terms in which that membership would end up being settled. And during that time, we have a lot of businesses, small businesses, getting very worried indeed about their trading capability over that period. So, I just think I've got a better vision for Scotland. I think we do need a Scotland with more power over tax and more power over benefits. We definitely need a Scotland without a bedroom tax, and a Scotland that insists on paying people a living wage through every opportunity we actually have to do that. And a Scotland that's determined that young people should always be able to find work, whether it's at home or whether it's in England or across Europe. A Scotland where we can all grow and prosper and succeed. That's my vision for Scotland. I think we can achieve that as part of a joined-up UK. I think we can build a better Scotland and a better UK. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. John, you finished?
Well, thanks very much, and thank you all for coming along tonight. I agree with Mary about respect, and I think we respect the public, and we respect the public's engagement in this important decision. We respect each other in the way we conduct our debate. Another thing that wasn't mentioned, and I'm disappointed, but time always took its out, was climate change. Now that's something that's going to require collaboration. The Scottish Parliament set very challenging targets. We have to clearly work with the United Kingdom, which also has targets, the European Union, the US, indeed the world. That's a huge challenge that's being faced. I want to address the inequalities, and I make no apology for keep using that phrase, because Britain is a very unequal society. And, you know, Mary talked about austerity as being paying our debts, as how she saw it. Well, Mary's a very hard-working constituency MSP, as Jean is, and I'm sure Mike will know too. The issues that we're dealing with are disabled people who have been affected by the bedroom tax. The issues, something that was brought in by the Labour Party to deal with overheated economy of the south east of England. The issues we are dealing with are access to children because of the restraint in the bedrooms, and so many families now have extended families and custody, and access is an important issue. Mike's entirely wrong to bring up pensions as he did in the end there. It was a very clear statement of the UK Pensions Minister. It's an undertaking between the individual and the state, and that will be honoured. Also, again, to mention social care, which is a devolved matter there, and there has been cross-party consensus on free personal care. Mike's would be described as old Labour, and I commend many of his values, and he puts a lot of store in the return of a Labour government to deliver these. I have to tell you that's most unlikely, and it became even more unlikely after last week. The Scottish Government talks about early intervention, and this is intervening with particularly children to head off problems, and I think that's terribly, terribly important. And we can head off a lot of problems around the globe if we do speak and we do intervene early. As Jean says, this is not about the Scottish National Party. Other versions are available, and I can tell you that Mr Salmon wouldn't necessarily commend my version. And I think it's very important that all the voices are heard. There are parties, all the parties, including the Conservative Party, have people who support independence. I want to finish by telling you about Bashir Ahmed. Bashir Ahmed was a gentleman from Pakistan who became Scotland's first Asian MSP. And he came to Scotland, he was very impressed with what he saw. He found the people very welcoming, exactly as I would like to see it. And what he said, memorably said in my book, was he said, of course it's not where we're from that matters, it's where we're going together. I think there's an opportunity by voting yes to take us somewhere better. That isn't an isolationist position, that's an internationalist position. I hope you'll take that, and I hope you'll vote yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming tonight, but before we go, if there are any points you'd like to raise or anything you feel hasn't been raised tonight, you can come onto the website and make your views known. And we'll continue to put any referendum-related events in Nairn, or conversations, meetings, activists, pictures on the Gurn, so please send them in. If it's happening in Nairn and it's referendum-related, let us know. And of course you can continue to ask questions of the speakers. The MSPs have all their details, contact details on their parliamentary website, and Mike Robb also has a site. And so outside in the hall there's lots of literature from both sides of the debate. Please feel free to take some of that. And thanks for these guys for giving up their Saturday night, and for you for coming along with your Saturday night as well. And thanks to the centre staff. This is an excellent venue for this type of debate. And so, good night, folks. Thank you. And thanks to the team members that put this event on. Thanks very much, folks.
Thanks a lot.